The gavel struck like thunder and the courtroom inhaled as one, and in that silence a lone voice rose from the witness stand and said, "I lied." Judge Harold Pike said, "Repeat that for the record." The witness said, "I lied about seeing Leo that night." Mara Ellison, a 38-year-old black woman and defense attorney, felt her pulse kick, but her face stayed stone calm and unreadable. Victor Hale, a 45-year-old white male prosecutor, smiled without warmth, as if the confession were a trap disguised as mercy. Leo Ward, a 28-year-old white male defendant, leaned toward counsel table and whispered, "What does this mean for me?" Mara said, "It means we fight smarter." The court reporter's keys rattled like rain on tin, while the gallery strained to hear the air itself. The judge said, "Counsel, approach," and in those two words Mara heard the weight of her career. Her mentor's voice flickered in memory, a warning about lines you cross once and never recross. The witness stared at his hands, knuckles white, and the bailiff shifted, ready for the storm. Mara said, "Your Honor, this admission demands immediate relief." But under the steel of her tone lived an ache shaped like duty and fear. Outside these walls, a city moved on, indifferent to the crack forming under one woman's oath. The bench conference pressed in like a vice, and words became knives wrapped in velvet. Judge Harold Pike said, "Counsel, this is an extraordinary claim, and I will not let theatrics steer this court." Victor Hale said, "Then we agree, Your Honor, because the witness has perjured himself for attention." Mara Ellison said, "Or he has finally told the truth because conscience is heavier than fear." The bailiff shifted his boots as if bracing for aftershocks. Leo Ward stared at the grain in the wood, as if salvation were hiding in its rings. The judge's eyes moved between counsel like a metronome marking a funeral march. He said, "You will address the evidentiary basis, not your rival's motives." Mara said, "The record shows inconsistencies seeded by the state's own timeline." Victor said, "And a defense content to poison the well." The judge said, "File your motions by noon. The witness will be sequestered." In that instant, Mara felt the line between justice and strategy flicker like heat over asphalt, and she knew the next move might save her client and cost her soul. The corridor outside bled with whispers and camera shutters, and the marble echoed her steps like a countdown. A reporter said, "Miss Ellison, is your witness reliable or convenient?" Mara Ellison said, "Truth is not a convenience. It is a ledger that always balances." Victor Hale passed with a file pressed to his ribs like a shield, and he did not slow. Leo Ward said, "They want me to be the villain." Mara said, "They want a story that sells. We want the one that stands." A publicist offered a statement template like a life raft made of paper. She declined with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Her phone buzzed with a voicemail from her mother saying, "Be careful, baby." She saved it like a talisman. The courthouse doors breathed city air into the hall, cool and clean, and Mara felt the chill thread her spine. She said, "Back to work, Leo," and the hallway swallowed them with the grace of a cathedral and the warmth of a morgue. In a narrow conference room, the walls held diplomas like silent jurors, and a coffee ring stained the table like a verdict. Investigator Nora Briggs, a 42-year-old white woman, said, "The witness was pressured by someone with access to the precinct log." Mara Ellison said, "Name or proof, not rumor." Nora slid a photocopy across the wood, and the toner smudge looked like a bruise. Leo Ward said, "If this clears me, use it," and his voice cracked on the last word. Mara said, "We will not burn our case with gasoline." She felt the clock drag its nails across the hour. Nora said, "You know where this leads." Mara said, "I know where I cannot let it lead." The copy showed an edit time that could not exist without a key. The room seemed smaller, the air denser, the line thinner. Mara said, "We move to strike the prior statement and request sanctions," and beneath the strategy she tasted iron and doubt. Back in the courtroom, the air felt thinner, as if judgment consumed oxygen first. Judge Harold Pike said, "Defense, your motion by noon stands. Do you have further relief to seek?" Mara Ellison said, We seek immediate exclusion of tainted testimony and a mistrial if the contamination is systemic, Victor Hale said. Or perhaps defense seeks a do-over before the jury hears the truth. Leo Ward stared at the floor as if it might open and deliver him. The witness waited behind a wall of silence and a bailiff's shoulder. The gallery murmured like distant surf. Mara felt the pull of an option she had vowed never to touch, a path that could unmask the pressure but scorch the earth beneath her feet. She said, "We will show the source, Your Honor." The judge said, "Then you had better bring the fire and not the smoke." The gavel lifted and time paused, and a streak of light carved across Mara's notes like a line she might soon cross. The courthouse cafeteria hummed with low voices and the clink of porcelain, but Mara Ellison heard only the pounding of her own pulse. Investigator Nora Briggs said, "The precinct log we found points straight to someone on Hale's team." Mara said, "If we accuse without proof, we give him the win." Leo Ward sat at the end of the table, untouched coffee cooling beside him, staring at the headlines scrolling across a muted TV. The chyron read, "Trial in turmoil after witness confession." Mara's phone buzzed with an unknown number. She ignored it. Across the room, Victor Hale leaned against the counter, speaking quietly to a man in a gray suit Mara didn't recognize. Hale's smile was a blade she could feel from 30 feet away. She said, "Nora, keep eyes on him." Nora said, "Already on it." The scent of burnt toast hung in the air, and the hum of a vending machine seemed louder than reason. Mara felt the knot in her chest tighten, the weight of strategy and suspicion fusing into one. In chambers, the judge's bookshelves loomed like sentinels, and the leather-bound law felt heavier than air. Judge Harold Pike said, "Counsel, if you have accusations, bring evidence or withdraw them." "Victor Hale," said defense, "thrives on shadows, Your Honor." Mara Ellison said, "And prosecution thrives on burying light." The judge's gaze cut through them both, sharp and unblinking. "This court will not be a battlefield for your grudges," he said. Papers rustled as the clerk stacked files, the faint smell of old paper and polish rising. Mara thought of the photocopy in her bag, its timestamp like a ticking clock. Her mind weighed the danger of revealing it now against the chance it could be destroyed before noon. She said, "We will submit supporting documents under seal." Hale's jaw tightened, a subtle tell she filed away. The judge said, "Then do so before I lose patience." The tension left a metallic taste in her mouth. In the dim evidence room, the air smelled of dust and secrets. Nora Briggs said, "The access log shows 2 entries that don't match assigned badges." Mara Ellison said, "Whoever did this knew the system well." Leo Ward stood by the door, glancing nervously down the hall. The flicker of an old fluorescent bulb painted everything in uneven light. Mara traced her fingers along the steel filing cabinet, feeling the cold through her skin. "We copy what we can and get out," she said. Nora pulled a manila folder, the tabs worn and edges curling. Somewhere above them, footsteps echoed faintly, deliberate and slow. Leo whispered, "We're not supposed to be here, are we?" Mara said, "Neither were they." The file felt heavier than it should, a weight that could break a case or a career. Back in the courtroom, the jury filed in with faces unreadable as stone. Mara Ellison said, "Your Honor, we submit new evidence under seal, material to the integrity of the witness testimony." Victor Hale rose, voice sharp. "Defense is again attempting trial by ambush. Estoro." The judge said, "Overruled. The evidence will be reviewed in camera." Leo Ward's eyes flickered with a spark of hope, but Mara kept her face neutral. The witness avoided her gaze, his shoulders caving inward. Nora sat in the gallery, expression carved from granite, guarding the folder with her life. The court stenographer's rhythmic tapping filled the pauses like a drumbeat. Outside the windows, a breeze teased the heavy drapes, the sunlight shifting in long bands across the jurors' desks. The moment felt suspended, a single breath before the tide turned. The afternoon recess found Mara Ellison alone on the courthouse steps, the city humming around her like a distant tide. She pulled out her phone, scrolling past missed calls from an unknown number. A text from Nora read, "We're being watched." She scanned the street, eyes catching a black sedan idling across from the plaza. Its windows reflected the sky, hiding whoever sat inside. Victor Hale exited the building, pausing to speak to the man in the gray suit from earlier. The man glanced at Mara, his expression unreadable, then melted into the crowd. A gust of wind lifted the edges of her case file, and she caught them with a practiced hand. Her mother's voicemail played in her mind, layered over the street noise. "Be careful, baby." Mara squared her shoulders and stepped back inside, the doors closing behind her like a vault. The morning session began with a storm of objections, each one striking like a match in dry grass. Victor Hale said, "Defense is manufacturing distractions." Mara Ellison said, "We are exposing contamination in your own chain of custody." The judge's gavel cracked once, silencing the courtroom like a thunderclap. The witness shifted in his seat, eyes darting to the jury before fixing on the floor. Leo Ward whispered, "They're making me the enemy." Mara said, "Then we give them a bigger one." The court stenographer's keys clicked with mechanical urgency, recording each bar. Sunlight spilled through the high windows, cutting the air into bands of gold and shadow. Mara felt the weight of every juror's gaze, the unspoken question, how far will she go? In her mind, the answer was already written, but saying it aloud would be crossing a line she'd sworn to protect. She steadied her pen, ready to take that step if she must. In the cramped defense office, the blinds were half closed, slicing the room into stripes of light and darkness. Nora Briggs said, "The gray-suited man is an ex-cop, James Rudd, fired for evidence tampering." Mara Ellison said, "And now he's back in the orbit of our prosecutor." Leo Ward paced like a caged animal, the scuff of his shoes loud against the thin carpet. "They're going to bury me," he said. Mara looked at the corkboard map of connections, red string weaving a web of names and dates. She felt the pulse of the case shifting, as if the walls were closing in, but the target was finally visible. "If we expose Rudd, we expose Hale," she said. Nora said, "Or we expose ourselves to a war we can't win." The hum of the radiator filled the silence, a reminder that even heat here came with a cost. The hallway outside the prosecutor's suite smelled faintly of polish and power. Mara Ellison walked beside Nora Briggs, each step measured, their heels echoing off the marble. "If he's meeting Rudd here, we catch it on record," Mara said. Through the glass panel of Hale's office, they saw him shaking hands with the gray-suited man, a silent exchange charged with meaning. Nora lifted her phone subtly, recording. Hale glanced up, eyes locking on Mara's through the glass, his smile slow and deliberate. It was a warning, disguised as civility. "We've been seen," Nora said. Mara said, "Good." The tension in the air was thick enough to slow time, each second stretching into an unspoken dare. The moment was over in a blink, but the image was already burned into Mara's mind as evidence and omen. Back in court, Hale called a surprise rebuttal witness, a police officer with a spotless record and a confident stride. Mara Ellison felt the jury lean forward collectively. The officer said, "All evidence was handled per protocol." Mara said, "Yet your log contradicts itself." Hale objected, but the judge allowed her to continue. She displayed a blown-up copy of the log with the irregular timestamps. The officer hesitated, a hairline crack in composure. "I don't recall those changes," he said. The gallery murmured like surf under a storm. Mara knew this was her chance to see doubt, but she also knew pressing harder might reveal her hand too soon. She stepped back, letting the silence stretch, making the jury feel the pause as a question they'd need to answer themselves. The day's session ended under a sky bruised with oncoming rain. On the courthouse steps, Mara Ellison lit a cigarette she didn't intend to finish. Nora Briggs joined her, folder tucked tight under one arm. "Rudd's name came up in 2 sealed case files," Nora said. Mara exhaled smoke, watching it blur the streetlights flickering on. "Which means Hale's been working with him longer than we thought," she replied. Across the street, the black sedan was back, idling under the awning of a closed cafe. Its headlights flicked once, deliberate. "They're sending messages now," Nora said. Mara dropped the cigarette, crushing it under her heel. "Then we send one back," she said, and together they walked into the rain, the courthouse looming behind them like a silent witness. The rain had washed the city clean overnight, but inside the courthouse, the air was heavy with unspoken accusations. Mara Ellison sat at the defense table, reviewing sealed files Nora Briggs had uncovered. One page held Rudd's signature alongside Hale's initials. Nora whispered, "This is the connection we needed." Mara said, "It's also the one that could bury us if mishandled." Across the room, Victor Hale entered, his eyes scanning like a predator's sweep before a strike. The judge called the court to order, his voice echoing with finality. The witness from day one returned to the stand, looking older than a week ago. Mara felt every eye on her as she prepared to bring the truth to light, knowing that once spoken, it would scorch every bridge left standing. She rose slowly, file in hand, ready to ignite the fuse. Mara Ellison stepped toward the witness, her heels echoing on the polished floor. "Do you recognize this signature?" she asked, displaying the document. The witness hesitated, eyes flicking toward Hale. "Yes," he said finally, voice low. Hale objected, but the judge overruled. Mara said, "And you understand what signing this means for the chain of evidence?" The witness swallowed hard. "It means it wasn't handled by the book." The gallery gasped, the sound sharp and collective. Hale's face stayed composed, but his knuckles whitened on the edge of the prosecution table. Mara knew this was the crack that could break him, or invite retaliation she wasn't ready for. She returned to her table, the file heavy in her hand, her pulse louder than the judge's gavel. In the defense office over lunch break, Nora Briggs paced, the blinds casting restless shadows across the walls. "You've cornered him, but he won't fold," she said. Mara Ellison stood by the window, watching the black sedan parked across the street. "Then we make him," Mara replied. Leo Ward leaned against the desk, his cuffed hands resting on his lap. "They're going to come after me harder now," he said. Mara turned from the window. "They already are." On the desk lay a small envelope, slid under the office door while they were in court. Inside was a single photograph. Leo in handcuffs, time-stamped 2 weeks before his actual arrest. Mara stared at it, the implications hitting like a blow to the chest. Nora's voice was barely above a whisper. They're rewriting history. Back in court, Mara Ellison introduced the photograph as newly discovered evidence. Hale stood, voice edged with venom. "This is fabrication, Your Honor." The judge examined the image, his brow furrowing. "Where did this come from?" he asked. Mara said, "An anonymous source left it at my office during recess." Hale smirked. "Convenient." Mara replied, "Or damning." The judge ordered the image to be authenticated, but Mara knew the process could be dragged out. The jury, however, had already seen it, and the seed was planted. Leo sat straighter, hope and fear wrestling in his eyes. The courtroom seemed smaller, the air denser, the tension between counsel, a live wire stretched to its breaking point. That evening, the defense team met in a dimly lit diner, 2 blocks from the courthouse. Rain streaked the windows, neon signs outside, casting red and blue reflections across the table. Nora Briggs spread out case files, her voice low. "We push tomorrow, he'll have to show his hand." Mara Ellison sipped cold coffee, eyes fixed on the condensation sliding down the glass. "When he does, we make sure it's in front of the jury," she said. Leo Ward sat silent, staring at a plate he hadn't touched. Outside, the black sedan rolled slowly past, its presence impossible to ignore. Mara's reflection in the window met her own eyes, and for the first time she wondered if the cost of winning would be more than she could pay. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as Mara Ellison prepared to unveil the connection between Victor Hale and James Rudd. She could feel the jury's attention sharpen, like glass about to cut. "Your Honor," she began, We have proof the prosecution's witness worked under direct influence from an ex-officer dismissed for evidence tampering. Hale's face betrayed only the smallest flicker of recognition. The judge leaned forward. Proceed. Nora Briggs passed her the authenticated log, the timestamps matching Rudd's known activity. This is not a coincidence, Mara said, voice steady but edged with fire. Hale objected, citing character assassination, but the judge overruled again. The gallery murmured, the sound swelling like a storm just beyond the walls. Mara knew this was the turning point. Either the defense would rise on this revelation or collapse under its weight. Outside in the courtyard during recess, Nora Briggs leaned against the stone railing, flipping through her phone. Rudd's been sighted at Hale's apartment building. Last night, she said. Mara Ellison's eyes narrowed. Then we've got him meeting with the prosecution during trial. Leo Ward sat on the bench, knees bouncing. So what does that mean for me? Mara crouched to his level. It means the walls around you might be cracking. A cool breeze swept fallen leaves across the tiles, their rustle a reminder that change often came disguised as chaos. Nora handed Mara a still frame from security footage, Hale and Rudd shaking hands in the dim glow of a street lamp. Mara slid it into her file, the weight of the moment pressing into her bones. Back inside, Hale moved to strike the new footage from the record, calling it irrelevant. Mara Ellison rose immediately. It is highly relevant to the credibility of the prosecution's case, she said. The judge studied both lawyers before speaking. The footage will be admitted under strict review. Hale's jaw flexed, his smile gone. The bailiff placed the photo on the evidence table, the jury leaning in ever so slightly. Mara watched Hale's composure waver for the first time. It was subtle, but to her it was a fracture, and fractures could be widened. She returned to her seat, her hands steady, though her pulse drummed against her ribs like a warning. Later that day, in the defense office, Nora Briggs spread a series of connected photographs across the table. These are all meetings between Hale and Rudd over the last month, she said. Mara Ellison studied them, noting the timestamps and locations. Every one of these is outside courthouse hours, Mara said. Leo Ward leaned over the table. This means he's fixing my trial? Mara met his gaze. It means we can prove improper conduct, if we can get one more piece. The hum of the fluorescent light felt louder than it should, a steady reminder of the time running out. Outside, the black sedan was parked in its usual spot, patient as a vulture. The day's final blow came when the witness broke under cross-examination. Mara Ellison's voice was calm, precise. Were you ever approached by James Rudd before you testified? The witness hesitated, then nodded. Hale objected, but the damage was done. The gallery erupted, and the judge pounded his gavel for order. Mara caught Hale's eyes. There was no smile this time, only the cold recognition of a battle slipping from his grasp. Leo Ward exhaled a breath he'd been holding for weeks. As court adjourned, Mara knew the next move would have to be decisive. Every piece was in place. Now, it was about striking before Hale rebuilt his walls. The final day of testimony began under a leaden sky, the weight of decision hanging over every face in the courtroom. Mara Ellison stood with her notes perfectly aligned, her voice steady as she addressed the jury. What you decide will not just affect my client's life, it will define the boundaries of justice in this court. Victor Hale's gaze was locked on her, unreadable but charged. The witness stand was empty for the moment, yet the room felt full of ghosts from every lie and half-truth told here. The judge's gavel signaled the last witness arrival, and Mara knew this was it, her last chance to break through the wall Hale had built. She thought of the black sedan, the photo, the logbooks, each a shard of the same blade she was about to turn toward him. The prosecution called an unexpected witness, a retired detective with spotless credentials. Hale's strategy was clear: drown the defense in credibility. The detective testified that every procedure had been followed without deviation. Mara Ellison rose slowly. Detective, are you familiar with James Rudd? A pause. I know of him. Mara pressed, Would it surprise you to learn he accessed evidence during this trial? Hale objected, but the judge allowed it. The detective shifted in his seat, the pause speaking louder than words. The jury leaned in, hungry for cracks in the facade. Mara saw it, just a flicker of uncertainty, but enough to make the truth breathe in the room. During the recess, Mara Ellison stood in the shadow of a marble column outside the courthouse. Nora Briggs approached quickly, clutching her tablet. "It's here. Footage from inside the evidence room, time-stamped 2 nights ago. Rudd was there." Mara took the tablet, the grainy image showing Rudd with a key and a box. "We get this in today," Mara said. Nora hesitated. "It's risky without full verification." Mara's jaw tightened. "If we wait, Hale buries it." The wind carried the smell of rain from the west, and Mara knew they were running out of daylight, in every sense. Back in court, Mara requested to enter the new footage into evidence. Hale erupted, calling it inadmissible and prejudicial. The judge ordered both counsel to the bench. "If this is authentic," the judge said, "it changes everything." Mara replied, "It is, and it will." Hale's voice was low but lethal. "You're playing with fire." Mara met his stare. "Then I'll burn it all down if I have to." The bench conference ended, and the judge allowed the jury to see the footage. Gasps rippled as Rudd appeared on screen, opening the evidence box with casual familiarity. It was the sound of the defense's gamble paying off, or detonating in slow motion. As the session closed, the tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. The jury's faces were unreadable, the judge stern but measured. Hale gathered his papers with sharp, precise movements, never looking at Mara. Leo Ward leaned toward her. "Did we win?" She kept her eyes forward. "We gave them the truth. Now they decide." Outside, the rain finally began, drumming against the courthouse steps like a slow march. Mara felt it on her skin as she exited, each drop a reminder that whatever verdict came tomorrow, nothing about her life, or Hale's, would be the same again. The jury filed in, their expressions locked behind the discipline of 12 days of silence. Mara Ellison's hands were steady on the defense table, but inside, her heartbeat was a drum in a war march. Judge Harold Pike cleared his throat. As the jury reached a verdict, the foreperson, a middle-aged woman in a navy blazer, stood. "We have, Your Honor." Leo Ward's knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table. Mara's eyes flicked briefly to Victor Hale, who sat rigid, his jaw set. The air was heavy with the weight of all that had been said, and all that had been hidden. The verdict envelope slid across the bench, its rustle louder than the murmur of the gallery. Every breath in the room seemed held hostage by the moment. The foreperson read on the charge of aggravated assault, "We find the defendant not guilty." A gasp rippled through the gallery, followed by a low wave of murmurs. Leo Ward exhaled like a man breaking the surface after drowning. Mara Ellison allowed herself a single, slow nod. Victor Hale's eyes closed briefly, his hands folding over each other in a gesture that wasn't quite surrender. The judge banged his gavel for silence. Order in the court. Mara leaned toward Leo and whispered, "You're free." His eyes shone with disbelief and something heavier, a knowledge of how close the edge had been. The room's energy shifted, victory laced with the exhaustion of survival. Outside the courthouse, the air smelled of wet pavement and freedom. Cameras flashed in bursts as reporters swarmed. Nora Briggs flanked Mara Ellison and Leo Ward, blocking the worst of the press. "What will you do now?" a reporter shouted. Leo hesitated before saying, "Live." Mara said nothing, her gaze fixed on the black sedan now parked further down the block. The man in the gray suit leaned against it, arms folded, watching. It wasn't over, not for her. Nora touched her arm. "We can go." Mara nodded, but her mind was already building the next case in a war that wasn't entirely in courtrooms. That evening, the defense office was quiet, except for the ticking of the wall clock. Leo Ward's chair sat empty for the first time in weeks. Nora Briggs poured coffee and said, "You know he's not done." Mara Ellison leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling. "Neither am I." The files from the trial sat stacked neatly on the desk, but one folder, marked Rudd, remained open. Outside, the rain had returned, streaking the window in silver lines. The silence between them was the kind that came after battles won but wars still raging. Mara's reflection in the glass looked older, harder, and more certain. The next morning Mara Ellison stood alone on the courthouse steps, the city waking around her. She lit a cigarette, the smoke curling into the cold air. The black sedan was gone, but its absence felt like a pause in a conversation, not an end. She thought of Leah's freedom, of Hale's stare, of the file still open on her desk. Somewhere inside her the line she had crossed in this case felt permanent. She took one last drag, dropped the cigarette, and crushed it under her heel. On to the next, she murmured to no one, her voice swallowed by the hum of the city.